And I am excited for this one. What a great fight night main event we have here. The UFC is coming to Kansas City. Just went through a weekend without UFC, but now we're back. And we got Carlos the Nightmare Prates taking on Ian Garry in UFC Kansas City. The new main event that was originally supposed to be Khalil Roundtree versus Jamal Hill. But the Jamal Hill and Roundtree fight got canceled for the second time. And they're now rebooking it for UFC Baku. And we'll get more into that on a later date as to why they would have two Americans headlining a card in Azerbaijan with Rafi, if they have a fighter like Rafael Fiziev who's on the roster, who's literally from there. But that's a whole different conversation. Right now I want to talk about Carlos Prates getting taken off the Miami card and now is looking to go even higher and in a much higher ranked opponent in Ian Garry. And Ian Garry, first thing we got to say right off the bat about Ian Garry is mad respect to Ian Garry. Mad respect to this guy for stepping in again on a short notice fight and taking on a very dangerous opponent in Carlos Prates. In his last fight, of course, he stepped in on short notice when Bilal Muhammad got injured and took on Shavkat in a 5-round co-main event and really impressively put on a amazing performance where he almost even had Shavkat choked out. There was a really crazy moment. Both coming in undefeated. Ian Garry saved the event, and Shavkat did win, but Ian Garry is looking to bounce back in a big way, and he's doing it, though, by also taking on another short notice opponent, not necessarily the plan that he would have liked, right? Ian Garry, I assume, in his next fight wanted to really have a proper training camp and the proper preparation. But that's why you got to appreciate Ian Garry for what he's doing and literally standing on business and being one of the baddest fighters in the planet right now for taking such fights on short notice. And Carlos Prates, the fighting nerds. We just saw Gene Silva submit Bryce Mitchell. We just saw Mauricio Ruffi wheel kick King Green. These guys are show-stopping, showcasing performances all over the UFC right now. Kyle Borralho hasn't really been active, but all over you're just seeing these guys absolutely style on anyone in their path. They're creating highlight after highlight, and Carlos Prates is no exception to that. He's probably my favorite out of all four of them, and he's undefeated in his UFC run, as all the fighting nerds are. Apparently, it's not just the 4 straight KO wins that he's coming off in the UFC, but he is coming off 10 straight wins by knockout. And I guess I didn't count the Dana White Contender Series knockout that he had. So he comes into Dana White's Contender Series, KOs the dude, and then is putting all these bodies on the mat through 2024. Notable names are Neil Magny, Ling Jiang. I don't know the exact name. Hold on, let's take a look at that. Yeah, you look at Carlos Prates, 21-6, 11-fight win streak. Just an absolute monster and knockout artist, and he's putting everybody on the floor. Knocked out all these guys, all 4 of them. Radke, Giles, and then Jing Liang, and most recently Neil Magny, who was supposed to fight Jeff Neal. You look at Ian Garry's career so far. All wins, right? Comes into the Shavkat fight undefeated at 15-0. So notable names on his thing are Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, and Michael Venom Page. That was actually a really creative fight between Michael Venom Page and Ian Garry on 303. So yeah, these guys going at it, and I know a lot of people probably have the feeling that Ian Garry is going to bounce back, but in my mind, I just can't pick against the fighting nerds right now, and they're all doing what they're doing. They're all just completely unstoppable right now, and I don't want to pick against the current. And Carlos Prates, I like Carlos Prates a lot more than Ian Garry. Ian Garry was saying this week on an interview that he was fuming red that he didn't get the title shot over Jack Della Maddalena when he's just coming off a loss. That was a little bizarre for him to say. Like, you got to understand where you're at, Ian. You got to bounce back in this fight, but then you're right back in that top 5 conversation or top 2 conversation, either number 1 contenders fight or fighting for the belt. And this is a huge position for Carlos Prates, even bigger fight than what he originally was going to have. By beating Jeff Neal, you're only still breaking into the top 8, top 10. With Ian Garry now, Ian Garry's fighting way down. And Carlos Prates could, in a big way, if he, of course, continues his crazy streak and knocks out Ian Garry, doing that in a crowded fight night will really ascend Carlos Prates into the top conversations of the welterweight division. And again, welterweight is completely stacked. It is so deep right now when you have Bilal Muhammad at the top of the division. We'll see soon enough how he does against Jack Della Maddalena, or I should say how Jack Della Maddalena does against him. Sean Brady, after his last fight, beat Leon Edwards, is looking exceptional, is looking on higher levels than we may have thought. And then you have the Kamaru Usmans in the mix, the Colby Covington's not really active or the prime guys in the division anymore. And then you have all these new up-and-comers like Carlos Prates, Ian Garry, still have a veteran in Gilbert Burns in the division, Michael Morales, Michael Venom Page, or Michael Venom Page, he moved up to middleweight, so he's not even really in the division anymore. Who else? But the welterweight division is just crazy. And of course, Shavkat. So there's so much going on in the welterweight division right now. And there's so many guys that are really just up there. But whoever wins this could be going up maybe against Sean Brady. Or, I don't know. Joaquin Buckley also is in the mix there. He had a big year. So welterweight is stacked. Carlos Prates, just an absolute showstopper right now. He's doing insane things in the octagon. He has this creative striking game. He hunts. He's patient. Like most of the fighting nerds, they're just patient with how they fight, studying their opponents, and then and that's how Carlos Prates finds his openings, his finest shots. He stays patient, and that's what he did in his last fight versus Neil Magny. He clipped him in the final 10 seconds of the first round. The entire round, he was just patient, hunting, and finally, and barely even connected with Neil Magny, it seemed to me. But that goes to show the level of power this guy could have. So if Ian Garry does get caught, it will not look good for him. But Ian Garry, he's a well-versed submission, grappling, Charles Oliveira type fighter. We know he trains with Charles Oliveira. He's going to be looking to use a lot of that to kind of suppress Carlos Prates. And I don't know. That's what I thought Bryce Mitchell was going to do to Gene Silva. But Gene Silva completely dominated Bryce Mitchell and even submitted him. That was incredible to see Gene Silva just masterclass that dude in every way. Just incredible takedown defense. Whatever. I don't want to go on a whole Gene Silva rant. And if you're not for that Fighting Nerds glaze, then listen, the Fighting Nerds are where it's at these days. These guys are all doing huge things right now in their divisions. So, yeah, huge fight. A great Fight Night main event. And again, huge respect to Ian Garry for taking this on short notice. You got to respect it. But at the end of the day, I'm rocking with Carlos Prates. I know it's a little bit of a steep pick, I imagine, but I'm going to go with Carlos Prates to find a way to get it done. I haven't really seen his takedown defense, but I saw a little bit from Neil Magny. Carlos Prates, I think, could hold his own against Ian Garry, maybe, and get the KO win. So that is my thoughts on UFC Kansas City's main event. And if you look through the rest of the card, it's all right. It's decent. It's nothing too crazy, but kind of a fun main card. I'm just going to go through these fights a little quicker, but yeah, Zhang Mingyang versus Anthony Smith. Interesting that the UFC decided to book Anthony Smith versus Zhang Mingyang, who's a kind of a mysterious newcomer in the UFC. Won his first two fights. This mysterious up-and-coming prospect whose 2 straight wins are both by knockout KO in the first round. So this guy's dangerous and on a surge right now, and they're giving him to Anthony Smith, who was just kind of I felt bad, it was a kind of emotional mess in his last fight. Apparently he lost his friend, and he had an emotional performance versus Dominic Reyes at UFC 310. But he decided to come back for one more fight. I really don't know why he's coming back for one more fight. He should have just retired, in my opinion, already. But here he is, having one more go in the octagon. But for the UFC to send him off this way, giving a guy with the hot hand like Zhang Mingyang, this just kind of confuses me as to why the UFC would book this. Anthony Smith, he's been a player for some time in the light heavyweight division. Of course, he had the big moment with John Jones and a couple other fights. Beat Vitor Petrino, but then lost. Anthony Smith, yeah, I never really was a fan of Anthony Smith at all. So, Anthony Lionheart Smith. But in this fight, clearly I'm going with Zhang Ming Yang. Yeah. So Zhang Ming Yang to beat Anthony Smith in your co-main event for Kansas City. And that's Anthony Smith's farewell. And hopefully he lasts too, because Zhang Ming Yang so far has been knocking out his dudes. Jijit Jakadze versus David Onama. Not much to say on these two guys. I don't really pay attention to these two, but if I had to guess, David Onama coming off a win, Jijit Jakadze coming off the loss to Arnold Allen. So, actually, am I going to be is this going to be like a wild card kind of fight where I'm feeling like Jijit Jakadze bounces back? You know what? F it, man. I'm just going to go with Jijit Jakadze. Michel Pereira versus Abu Smagomedov. So Michel Pereira was on a big win streak before he lost to Anthony Fluffy Hernandez in his last fight in the growing middleweight division. There are some growing pains right now in the middleweight division. You have a couple of the big guys at the top, and then Michel Pereira and Abus's are in this middle ground. Abu Smagomedov, he's lost though to Sean Strickland and Kyle Baralio. But, he has the beard and he's Russian and whatever. Coming off the loss from UFC 308. No, the win, from 308. And then Michel Pereira coming off the loss from Anthony Hernandez. I think Michel Pereira is going to bounce back. Before the Anthony Hernandez loss, he was coming off a crazy win streak and he had 2 straight wins with submissions. Michel Pereira, he bounces around. If you know anything about him, he jumps does all these crazy different movements. He's high flying in the octagon. So Michel Pereira to bounce back is my pick on that. Randy Brown should really be on a 4-fight win streak. I thought he got robbed in that last fight. Brian Battle did not deserve to win that fight. Randy Brown, knowing him, his style, he's more of a KO knockout kind of guy. He was on a 3-fight winning streak before he lost to Brian Battle. But really, it was just one of the bad decisions on that night that Randy Brown was on the wrong side of. So I think he's going to come in and bounce back and hopefully get a nice little KO versus Nicholas Dalby. Give us some excitement as we move up this main card for Kansas City. A crowded fight night. And Nicholas Dalby, don't know really anything about this guy. Don't know anything. So going to go with the guy who I know, Randy Brown, to get it done. Do some cool things on the feet. And last fight I'll talk about is Andre Muniz versus Ikram Alaskarov. This fight was originally supposed to be on the UFC second Saudi Arabia card, but got moved. Ikram Alaskarov coming off the loss to Robert Whittaker. I love Robert Whittaker, so I was really happy with that. But, of course, Ikram, he came in on short notice to save the event. It was supposed to be Khamzat Chimaev, and Robert Whittaker knocked him out in the first round. We could say that maybe it was because of the lack of a proper training camp for Ikram. It was like a week's notice, but now he has a full training camp, and we'll see how he does versus Andre Muniz. Just another Russian that looks scary with the beard around his face, and I'll take Ikram Alaskarov. I think on paper, so he's gonna do what the Russian Dagestani guys do. So Ikram Alaskarov versus Andre Muniz, and the rest of the card, don't really know much about these people. So yeah, those are overall thoughts on UFC Kansas City, but really I'm just here for this main event fight. Carlos Prates versus Ian Garry. Big fight in the welterweight division to see who could propel themselves into the next level. Again, massive respect to Ian Garry for taking this on short notice. It's a much bigger fight than what Carlos Prates originally had planned, so I'm hoping to see another insane KO by Carlos Prates. Until the next time.